2276, a bill relating to manufacture, import, sale, transfer, or possession of plastic firearms in unfinished frames or receivers and unserialized firearms penalties. Reported from the Committee on Judiciary with a substitute and from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations.
Senator from Roanoke City, Senator Edwards.
Mr. President, I move the committee substitute be adopted.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the committee substitute be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee substitute is adopted. Senator from Roanoke City, Senator Edwards.
Mr. President, I move that the bill pass, and by way of explanation.
Senator, has the floor.
This has to do with plastic firearms and unfinished firearms that do not have serial numbers. What this does, Mr. President, and it was narrowed in committee, that it should be unlawful to import, sell, transfer, or possess a plastic firearm or a firearm that after removal of all parts cannot be detected by, for example, an X-ray or an airport device as a firearm. And what it further does, Mr. President, it provides that it should be, and that would be a Class 5 felony to sell one of these objects. It would be a Class 1 misdemeanor for a person, and it could be punishable up to Class 4 felony for a second or subsequent offense for a person to possess or receive an unfinished frame or receiver that it does not have a serial number. And so the judiciary could be narrowed the prohibition on unfinished frames, receivers, or firearms that were unlawful to the selling, offering for sale, or transfer, or the purchasing of such items. With that explanation, I move the bill pass.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Rise to speak to the bill.
Senator, has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I would hope that we would look carefully at this bill and consider voting against it. Now, I sat in committee, and many of the gun groups that do testify said, look, there are parts of this bill that we really have no problem with. But what this is doing is it's really impacting a number of firearms that have been out there, that have been owned by people legally for 50 years. There are hobbyists and others who may have made in their shop a firearm that would fall under the category that are set forth in this bill. If they die and that gun has to be transferred to another family member, I mean, that is potentially a criminal act. And this bill has no provision in it with respect to, how we're going to deal with those that are out there, how they might be surrendered, how the owners or families of owners or folks might be compensated for deprivation of their property. The suggestion was made if this was grandfathering in those that are in people's closets or basements that are already in existence, that there might have been broad support for this, but this does create some significant problems, including due process problems that I think render this a very flawed approach to a legitimate problem. So I would hope that members would vote against this bill.
Mr. President.
Corporate Senator from King George, Senator Stewart, rise.
Wondered if the gentleman from Rockingham would yield for a question.
Senator yield.
I will yield.
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
I didn't have the opportunity to hear this bill that day because I left my proxy and was across the hall in another committee. But as I look at the bill and listen to the gentleman's testimony, I'm just curious. There are a number of us that have really old shotguns, and one of my prized shotguns is an 870 Wingmaster that my brother gave to me when I was probably about 12 years old. It's been re-blued 2 or 3 times, was probably built, I don't know, in the 40s maybe or before. Heck of a nice shotgun. I've used it for a lot of years and kept it in good shape, but the problem I have is serial numbers worn off of it from use, frankly. Would that fall into this category?
Well, Mr. President, I would suggest that perhaps the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is the appropriate person to ask, but I think it very well would fall into that category. And and if you want to pass that to your children, that act of passing it to your children could be a criminal act.
Mr. President, would the gentleman from Roanoke City yield for a question?
Senator Yield.
Mr. President, be happy to yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I would ask the gentleman the same question. That old 870 Wingmaster, which is just a bird gun, but I think more of that gun than any other one I own, the serial number has actually worn off of that because it is so old. Despite the fact that I take care of it and keep it in good operating condition, it's one of my favorite guns to hunt with. Would I fall under this provision?
Senator's the floor.
I wouldn't think so, because you had a serial number on it. This has to do with those that were, if you can keep a gun that does not have a serial number, and antique guns, for example, would fit in that category. But as far as transferring it, if you had a serial number, you could still transfer it too. It doesn't say it has to be, well, it does say if it's not imprinted with a serial number, I guess there's some ambiguity there. You say, well, it was imprinted, you just can't read it.
Mr. President.
Yeah.
For purpose, Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Sarvell rise.
Senator from Roanoke City, yield.
Senator Yield.
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just direct the senator from King George to subsection E, which is lines 55 through 57 of the bill, which clearly state that any gun that was manufactured before October 22 of 1968 is exempt from the bill, or it's exempt from sections C and D of the bill.
Further question?
Would the gentleman yield for another question?
Senator Yield.
I yield.
Eastern Fairfax, that is, the smartest guy in the room here.
No.
I shouldn't say,
I don't know about that.
Mr. President, assuming that shotgun was built in 1970, but it has been used so much that the serial number has actually worn off of it and is not legible anymore, would that gun be under this provision?
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, I would say that I think it would be, but I would also just note that the bill previously prohibited possession. We took possession out in committee, so it only applies to manufacturers or sales, so that it's still okay to possess it.
Mr. President.
Further question?
Does the bill not say you can't purchase it?
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
Does the bill not say you can't purchase it?
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, yes, it does include purchase. Just does not prohibit possession if you already have it.
Would the gentleman yield for a final question?
Senator Yield.
I'll yield.
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
I'd ask the gentleman, who has the burden of proof on that? Would it be the Commonwealth in prosecuting this case, or would I have to prove a negative as a defendant?
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, like any case, the Commonwealth always has the burden of proof.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. For purposes, Senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson rise.
Mr. President, speak to the bill.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I sympathize with Senator Stewart's position. Years ago, through my father's estate, came into a number of firearms that were old shotguns, things of that nature. I had 12 gauge, 20 gauge, and a lot of them are similar in that they don't have serial numbers. Now, as to when they were manufactured, I have no idea, and I have no way of proving. And of course, I have possession of those. I keep them under lock and key. I'm a responsible owner. There will come a time when my time on this earth will pass, and I will give them to my children because they're part of our family's history. You know, a bill like this, and there's parts of this bill I like, there's parts of it I don't like. The part I don't like is presuming that an unserialized firearm is part of a crime, or if you own an unserialized firearm, that therefore you're potentially a criminal. And we did take out possession in the Senate committee. The problem is that we still left in transport, we still left in assemble. So you could potentially disassemble a firearm to go to a shooting range or to put it in a case and then reassemble it once you get to the location that you're at. And again, these could all be safety measures, but under the strict ruling of this law, again, you could be putting somebody in criminal jeopardy. I just think this bill is overbroad. Again, the parts of it I like about the plastic guns and going through X-rays, and that's fine. But the Supreme Court of the United States has determined in the Heller case that you do have a Second Amendment right to bear a firearm, and it doesn't say it has to be a serialized firearm. And you can manufacture a firearm, and you have a constitutional right. And again, I feel like this bill's overbroad, and I feel like it needs a lot more work. And unfortunately, we're at the end of this session, so I'm not quite sure when that work's going to happen.
What purpose does the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator D. Steph, rise?
Mr. President, will the gentleman from, I believe it's Roanoke City, rise for a question?
Senator Yield? Senator from Roanoke City?
I'll be happy to yield.
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
Mr. President, and for the gentleman from Roanoke City, would you say that if I have a custom-built firearm that's unserialized, that it would be a Class 4 felony, I believe it is, under this bill?
Senator's the floor.
I believe it had to do with transferring it without getting a license, and you can get a license from ATF, a serial number from ATF. You'd have to do that in order to transfer it.
Further question?
Mr. President, is there any exemption for our Olympic athletes or collegiate athletes or high school athletes who are members of shooting teams or athletes who do pentathlons?
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I always assumed that they have serial numbers on their rifles. I know when I was in the Marines, I had a serial number. I can even tell you what it is today, probably.
Further question?
Mr. President, speaking to the bill.
Senator's the floor.
In actuality, a lot of these firearms are actually custom built to the individual, similar to some of our military sharpshooters. And I understand as I read this that military and law enforcement are exempt. Mr. President, for our collegiate athletes, for our high school athletes, for our Olympic athletes who train, practice, and live in the state of Virginia, their weapons are custom built. A lot of them are truly handmade by gun enthusiasts or gunsmiths to that athlete specifically. The length, the width, the weight. And Mr. President, these are not serialized. They are truly made, custom made for those individuals. I believe that, Mr. President, that they're not covered under this bill. And Mr. President, I really don't think that anybody there should be considered a felon, or if we pass this, would be a felon. They're truly trying to represent their high school, their college, or the USA. Thank you.
For what purpose does the senator from Spotsylvania, Senator Reeves, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just briefly to speak to the bill.
Senator's the floor.
I just wish to associate my comments with the senator from Fairfax City and from Stafford. There are many of us in here that enjoy shooting birds, and when you're around those type of folks, everybody has every different kind of shotgun known to man, and you might borrow a shotgun from a colleague out there in the blind and like the way it shoots, and they're willing to get rid of it. And Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, I would tell you that's how I got my very expensive Remington Versamax, of which they don't make anymore. But the conditions in which we use some of these firearms is pretty rough. So you wind up doing a process called Cerakoting on the firearm to try to maintain it from pitting and some other things. I happen to have one of those that no longer bears a serial number. It's not a real old gun, but it can knock down some birds. And I'd like to give that to my son, but now I'm a little bit worried that I would be in possession of a firearm that's illegal under this section. I think this bill is not right now. I think it could use some work. And Mr. President, that's where I'd sit on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, for what purpose, Senator from Accomack?
Mr. President.
What? Okay. Hold on one second. For what purpose, Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Serbell, rise?
Can this bill go by temporarily so we can clean it up a bit and get it ready for a conference party?
Mr. President,
Okay, that's the motion. For purpose, Senator from King George, Senator Stewart, rise.
would a substitute motion be in order at this point?
Senator,
Mr. President,
so Senator, so there are two motions pending. There's the motion for passage and then the motion to pass by temporarily. You can only have the two motions.
I'll withdraw the request, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. So without objection, House Bill 2276 will go by temporarily.